Want to do this book review on The Sum of Us, what racism costs everyone and how we can prosper together. It's by Heather McGhee. And Heather McGhee is an expert in economic and social policy. She's the former president of the inequality focused think tank Demos. McGhee has drafted legislation, testified before Congress, contributed regularly to news shows including NBC's Meet the Press. She now chairs the board of Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization. McGhee holds a BA in American Studies from Yale University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. Now, obviously, my being a historian, why would I be covering a book on racism? Well, as an attorney and an economic specialist, who Dr. McGhee is, not me, she actually points out the beauty and importance of history in everything that we do. There are no disciplines that really don't involve history. If you are going to be an electrician, you're going to study the history of how electricity evolved, and you're going to go from the simplest to the most complex. How something starts to, how it becomes to its most complex state. And that's what she does using economics and legislation. So, in many ways, this is a history book. And what I'm going to do, this book won, it is a New York Times bestseller, and it's another award that it won. Let me see if it's on the back of the book. But I recommend it to everyone. And I know there's an array of people that follow these videos. Some of the most liberal minded to the most conservative minded people are always welcome in this virtual classroom of exchange. So even if you don't like policies that seem to be, I cringe to use the word libertarian because I don't differentiate between liberals and conservative historically. I think they're pretty much two wings of the same bird. But if you are not aligned with thought of communities coming together for the greater good of everybody and kind of buy into the hierarchy in which, be it the economic hierarchy or the racial hierarchy in which the country was built, at least read this book. And if then you don't have to, you don't have to buy the book. I bought the book, but then found out I already had the book. I'd gotten from one of the universities that I work at. I already had the book, but what made me buy the book was I was listening to it as an audiobook for free from my public library. So one thing that you're going to do, if you haven't really gotten into reading or you're having trouble with reading, um, give yourself a cushion. If you want to build your reading back or build your reading at all, try audiobooks. I used to listen to a lot of music, especially when I worked on my cars. I'd have music playing all the time. And when I'm driving back and forth to places, I would either have nothing on or I would not have, or I would have music on. And I saw after a while that was time that I could be enriching myself. So it was a young lady I know who listens to books on tape, and I know my mother does. I just hadn't. So try doing the books on tape, but no matter what you think about, if you are the most staunch racist or if you are the most liberal of liberals, have some information to back up what you think or what you don't think. Or if you completely disagree with libertarian values or historically or traditionally recognized libertarian values, understand their values so you can discredit them intellectually instead of just passionately. To be honest, this is going to be more than one video. I try to keep my videos around 12 minutes. There's no way you can cover this book in 12 minutes. This book goes through many dynamics of history, but what I'm going to do is to pay her the courtesy of staying as close to her narrative as possible by actually reading some excerpts from it to kind of give you an idea as opposed to really telling you or even trying to sum it up. I will take some of her discoveries. My journey across the United States from California to Mississippi to Maine, tallying the cost of racism, has led me to 5 discoveries about how we can prosper together. The first is that we have reached the productive and moral limit of the zero-sum economic model that has crafted the cradle of the United States. We have no choice but to start aiming for a solidarity dividend. Now, what she is calling the zero sum is the social policy that teaches poor whites that for blacks to get something, or for minorities to get something, or for middle class, for poor people to get something, that means they lose. To lift the wage for the working class means to drop the value of the salaries of the middle class, or to allow immigrants into the country takes the jobs away from the white working class. That threat of for you to do better, for someone else to do better, you have to do worse. That's a very illogical perspective, the zero sum. And that is something I have always tried to articulate, but could not do better than Dr. Heather McGhee. Because no one can take your job if over 90% of the country CEOs are white men. An immigrant can only take your job if that man gives them your job. There's no way, if whites are doing the hiring, poor whites would lose by the presence of anyone else unless it's the decision making of those who control the jobs. So that is just an example of the zero sum. Now, the solidarity dividend is where it's showing historically when you don't buy into the racial politics of this group wants this legislation because they're lazy, or this group wants these policies in place because they want a handout. That type of policy or politics or propaganda has been so prevalent in United States history that poor whites have missed out on legislation that would benefit them more because they have more in common socially and economically with immigrants in racial minorities, economically, socially, educationally, access to wealth, that when they buy into those politics, they actually hurt themselves because they've bought into what they're being told by the people who are controlling the politics, that these bad people want this, and they vote against it because they don't want to be the bad people. That's how you see poor, white, underemployed, underinsured Americans, undereducated white Americans supporting billionaire and millionaire political candidates when they are on two different social stratifications completely. So, how is it these poor people who need are voting for agendas aligned with people who don't have that need? That's where that type of policy comes from, and that's where she starts talking about the solidarity dividend, as to where you look at policies on their face as opposed to stigmas and representations, as to where a rising tide lifts all boats. So the number one discovery she made is we have to recognize that the zero sum policy has not worked, and it doesn't work for the greater group. It works for what the country was put together for. The country was put together for the elite to maintain the bulk of the resources, and the working class to be divided and fuss over only the finances that were allocated to that level of society. The second is the quickest way to refill the pool of public goods for everyone. When our nation had generous public benefits, they were the springboard for a thriving middle class, but they were narrowly designed to serve the white and soon to be white Americans. So the reason why she said that about pools is because she was talking about how so much money went into public pools to bring the white and soon to be white immigrants together in community. That money was put in place for that, but they wanted to keep certain people out of it, blacks in particular, that ultimately it ended up the communities losing them altogether because they would rather shut them down than to share them. So that's another case of the zero sum, as to where you begin to follow politics that cause you to lose rather than win. Her third was that people are not all standing in the same depths today, so we must resist the temptation to use universal instruments to attain universal ends. When it comes to designing solutions, one size has never fit all. Everywhere I have found white people paying the spillover costs of racism. I also found that without exception, their co-workers and neighbors of colors were paying even more in lost wealth and lost health and lost lives. Getting white support to address those different levels of need and to acknowledge the racism that caused those differences is never easy, particularly when the zero-sum mental model turns every concession into a threat or loss. Number four, that's why uprooting the zero sum is so essential, as it is embedded in the place. It has embedded in its place the value that I found radiating out of people who have the biggest impact on me in their communities, the knowledge that we truly need each other. The fifth and final discovery is that we've got to get on the same page before we can turn it. Now, when I am addressing history. We have a lot of people just leave the past in the past. That's over with. There's no more racism, blah, 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 blah. What makes you think that there are millions of people that are intellectuals, that are successful, that are accomplished, that have the ability and rationale to articulate inequities in society, and they're just making it up? If something has happened for hundreds of years in a community, none of the governing documents have changed. None of the economics have changed as far as structure. The education system hasn't changed. The legal system has not changed. The governing documents have not changed. The insurance companies, social policy has not changed. Why do you think that outcomes would be different? It just doesn't make sense. So we can't turn the page or get out of the past, because I need you to come with me. I need you to have an understanding as to why we need to come together, because if I move without you, we're not on the same level of consciousness, and you're still going to be functioning the same way, because it is my reality that you don't see. I've become acutely aware of the dominant reality. And that's what Dr. McGhee is discussing in The Sum of Us. I'm going to pick up, this will probably have 3 parts, because there are some parts I'm going to do more reading out of this book. And I will try to point out as much of the historical value in the book, or the historical narrative. Generally, I am strictly a academic history book reader. In this particular book, I actually read it by accident, and it was the historical structure and nature of it that kind of drew me to it. So there will be more of these come, but definitely listen to it for free. Public library, get your library card, listen to it when you're driving in the car, or if you're at work, if you can wear headphones at work, whatever your vocation may be. Don't read it to agree with it. Just like you don't watch my videos to agree with me. It's for us to begin to discuss what we disagree on. And at the very least, if you see me as an enemy, learn the thoughts of your enemy. So you can better combat your enemy, as opposed to having a perception of what your enemy thinks. And your perception of what you think, you're only functioning in your reality at that point. And that's not communication. So at the very least, the historic perspective that I am presenting is at least a window into what it is you're up against, or what you're trying to align with. So we're going to pick this book up in another video.